Okay, in this quick tutorial, we're going to make a game which looks something like this, where we have a number of enemies in the bottom, which are automatically shooting. We have a player, and the player can shoot back, and obviously we got a score counter there, which is incremented once the enemies have been hit. And if we look at the player, when the player is hit by the enemies, bullets, the score obviously then decrements and it goes back down. So this isn't going to be a very complex game. It is actually going to be a fairly simple game. The graphics in here are obviously going to be very basic, but the reason for this tutorial is just to show you some of the basics that GameMaker can do, and to show you how to sort of implement a really basic score counter, how to get things working at random, and how to get objects moving without user input. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a sprite. So I'm going to click on my sprite folder, right click, go to create, and then go down to sprite. And what we're going to do is we're going to call this one S player. And there we are, that's set. So the size of the sprite here is 6464. Right, so it's going to be quite small, not too big. I am on a high resolution screen at the moment, so it is going to be fairly sort of small towards the center. If you are using a lower resolution screen, it'll be bigger. I'm leaving it at this by default. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on edit image, and we're actually going to draw our sprite. So I'm going to draw a little sort of alien spacecraft. So let me just use some of these tools. Now, if you haven't used this before, this is a lovely little interface. If you've used GameMaker 8 or anything a little bit newer, then you can be fairly familiar with this. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off by using this sort of ellipse tool or the circle tool. I'm going to, if you notice, it's sort of in half. So you've got this one here, which is a solid fill. You've got this one here, which is an outline only. So I'm going to click on the solid fill here, and I'm going to choose a fairly darkish color, which is there. And I'm just going to draw that out like so. Okay. Lovely. So that's my start of the base. Now, one of the things that you might have just noticed is in the right-hand corner here, this layers property. Now, this is really, really, really useful, and I'd encourage you to use this if you are building up something within GameMaker. So I'm going to add in a new layer. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a top now for my little spacecraft. And to do that, I'm going to click on the ellipse tool again, and we're going to go for the outline. And I'm going to choose a darker color, and I'm just going to draw like so. Lovely. Now you'll notice a few things with that. If I wanted to move this now, I can use my rectangle tool, and I can select it, and I can then move it and do what I want with it. Now the downside with this at the moment is it's in front of my base. So what I'm going to do is click on the layer and just drag it down, and you go. It's as simple as that. Now if you wanted to make this sort of circle a little bit thicker, if I just delete this layer, what we can do is, if I add the layer back in and we click on the ellipse tool, you can change the size of the brush at the top here. And indeed, if you are using a really big canvas, you can increase it then manually. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to make it to 3, and we're going to make this then a little bit bigger. So there we are, it's like that. And again, I'm going to drag it down. Now, there's one last thing I'm going to do, one final touch. I'm going to click on my paintbrush tool, and I'm just going to put in just a few little things here. I can add this onto a new layer, and then drag the layer up, and then we're just going to add in 1 or 2 bits and bobs like that. There we are, that's done. So I'm happy with this. This is my final player. I'm going to close this now, and that saves it. And you can see there, that's what it looks like. Everything's good so far, so let's close that. Now, our player is like a costume, it's what we wear, so we now need to make an object, so because we control the object. So if I right click on the object, go to create, and go to object, I'm going to call this O player, and what we're going to then do is select the sprite. So click on no sprite at the moment, click on the sprites folder, and then click on the S player, and that sets the sprite. So if I close that down now, we can add the sprite to the room. Right, sorry, not the sprite, the object to the room. Sorry, we add the object to the room. So I'm going to open the rooms folder and double click on room 1. Now by default it has a black background, so we're going to change that To do that, I click on the background layer, and again we've got layers here in the top left hand corner, and by default there I have a color. Now if I select the color and then select, say, a grey, and then click OK, that's pretty much ready to go. Now you'd be tempted just to click on this object and drag it in, but you might notice there's a little X to it, and if you did leave it go, it just brings up a bit of a warning. So what you need to do is you need to create instance layers. So it's a really good idea. So if you just watch what I'm going to do, to separate things like enemies and players out onto different layers. So I'm going to click on this here, create instance layer, and you can see it's made now instances 1. So I'm going to right click on that and go to rename, and we're going to call this player. So all I've done, I've typed and pressed enter, and that saves it. Now what I can do is I can drag my player on, and I can dump it. I'm dumping it roughly in the center there. Now if you wanted to see what this looks like, on the top there's a play, and if I click on the play, it compiles the program for me, and this is what our game looks like so far. Now we can't do anything, we can't move anything, because we haven't told it how to move, but you see it loads without any sort of problems, so that is good in its own right. So let's close this, and let's get our player to move. Now to get the player to move, what we are going to do is double click on the player object, so the O player, and we are going to add what's called events. Now with GameMaker we have events, and then from the events we have something called actions. So if I click on add event and then I go down to key down, what we are going to program it to do is move. When I press the right key it's going to move to the right, and when I press the left key it's going to move to the left. So I'm going to do the right key first. Now the way I do the right and the left is going to be slightly different, because I'm going to show you two different ways. It doesn't matter which way you do it, but I'm going to show you two different methods. So I'm going to go down to right, and what you can see then is we've got an event, and then this is the action here. Now if I just make this a little bit smaller and move this over, it'll get more of it on the screen. There we are. Okay. So what we're going to do is drag some things in here, because this is what my code is. Now the easiest way that I always find is if I drag in this assign variable, and what I'm going to say is the X value, so the value of X, which is think of it like a graph. You've got an X and Y. So what I'm basically doing is I'm assigning X a value of 5, and I'm going to basically say that's relative. Now what that means is it keeps on adding 5 to wherever the X position is. Now if I play this and hold down the right key, you can see now my object moves over towards the right, which is good. Now if I take out this relative, just to show you what it does. Now if I just press the right key, watch what happens now to my player. It goes over to the left there, which is actually position 5, or 5 pixels in, I think it is, something like that. So it's not actually doing anything, and I can press the right key as much as I want, it's not moving. So you need to make sure this relative is checked if you are going to do it this way. Now the other alternative is to use something called direction and speed. So what I can do is if I go to add event and key down and do left, some people prefer to do it like this, where they use this direction and they say, right, we're going left, and then they use the speed option and they say speed of 5. Now these two are very similar, right? You don't need to do the relative on this one, but you will do on this one. So these two things do pretty much the same thing. There is one difference though if you use this method, and I'll show you what you'll need to do now. So let's compile the program, and if I press the right key it moves to the right. If I leave go it stops. If I press the left key and then leave go, it keeps on going. So what you need to do, if you do use this method, right, you also need to add in another key down, which basically says when there's no key pressed. Right, so when no key is pressed, we basically don't do anything. Now it doesn't matter which one you use, there's no real difference between them. You can either use the X or you can use the direction. I think probably from a beginner perspective this is a little easier to understand because you can see where things are going, but it really doesn't matter. Okay, so we've got our player moving, so let's now add in an enemy. So to do this we're going to add in a sprite. So I'm going to go to create, right click create, and then sprite. We're going to call this one S enemy, and again I'm going to go to edit image. Now for our enemy, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an outline here. We're going to make almost a little delta symbol. There we are. And I'm going to add in a shape on the bottom. And I'm going to use the fill tool this time and set the color to black, so we have a little delta symbol there, and that's ready to go. So I'm going to close that, and what we then need to do is make an object for our enemy. So right click create and then go down to object. So we're going to call this O enemy. Select the enemy here in the sprite. This is my enemy ready to go. Now what I'm going to then do is go back to my room. I'm going to create a new instance layer, and this time I'm going to right click, put a rename, and we're going to call this enemy. And then I'm just going to add in a few enemies. Now a quick way of doing this, if I drag one in and then hold the Alt key down on my keyboard, you can see when I press the Alt and leave go, holding down the Alt key and clicking is a really quick way to get sort of a duplicate of the same object that you've put in already. Okay, so I've now put a few of these in and I've lined them up. It doesn't really matter where you put them. You can put them close together, you can space them further apart, you can put them at different lengths if you need to. It doesn't really matter, your choice entirely. You do with whatever you're comfortable with. Okay, so we've got our enemies in and we've got our player. Now if I just play the program again just to make sure everything works. There we are, yeah, doesn't seem to be any issues with this. So that's all working really well. Now what I need to do is get away so that when I press the space bar, my little alien here, the player, can shoot and it can shoot the enemies. So to do this, we are going to create another sprite. So I'm going to right click and then go to create, and we're going to click on sprite. I'm going to call this S player bullet. And I'm going to do something a little bit different this time. I'm going to change the size of this bullet. So I'm going to, sorry, not the bullet, the sprite. So I'm going to click on this option here, the resize. And what we're going to then do is we're going to resize the sprite itself. Now by default, if I do change this, the width to say 32, watch what happens to the height. When I click in the height, it also goes down to 32. Now the reason for that is we are maintaining our aspect ratio. So if I take the tick out of this and then change, say, the width to 16, you can see now that hasn't updated, that hasn't changed, and that is essentially what we need. So let's apply that, and what you're going to see then, hopefully the screen recorder can pick this up, but you've got a really faint line going here. So let's click on edit image, and we're going to make a really sort of little bullet which is coming down, and let me click on that one there, hit the polygon, and I'm going to choose a dark color for this. That's about roughly center, and let's choose another color there. There we are. That'll do. I'm happy with that. Okay, so let's close that, and let's now create an object. So let me close that. Let's create, right click, create on object. So this time we're going to name this O player bullet. Don't forget to select the sprite. And that is that. So let's close this. And go back to our room. Now what we want to happen is every time I press, say, the space bar, I want the player to create a bullet which shoots. So to do this, I'm going to open my player. I'm going to add an event, and this time we're going to say, right, when the key is pressed, so when the space key is pressed, so when the space key is pressed, we're going to do something. Now what we want to do is create an instance. Now an instance is create like almost like a person, right? So you want to create one of. So you can see here it's a light bulb. So if I I'll just drag that into the main area here. You can see it says, right, create an instance. What's the object? Well, the object is going to be the bullet. So if I go to objects and then go to bullet, and then we need to look at this, the X and the Y, right? So where do we want to create it? This is important. Because we're creating this inside the player, we need to make sure it's what's called relative. So it's relative to where the player is. Otherwise, what will happen is we don't want the bullet to be created over here if the player is here. So we need to make sure that our bullet is created wherever the player is. It's going to be placed on the instances layer, which is fine. We've got one over here. And that's now pretty much ready to go. So if I just play this, just to show you what's going to happen. Now my game's loaded. If I move it over to the right and then press the space as an example, every time I press the space, it is creating a bullet, which is fine. But you'll notice two things. You'll notice where the bullet's been made. So the bullet's been made in the top left-hand corner, and the bullet's not moving. So there's a few really easy things and easy fixes for this. So the first thing we need to do, let me stop the game running. And let me just close all the other windows down for this. What we need to do is change the origin of the bullet and the player. So I'm going to open the player sprite first. And you might have never seen this before, but in the top corner here, you've got what's called the origin. And I'm going to set it to the middle center. So that's basically where the middle of this sprite is. So if you remember, when the bullet was made, it was always made in the top here. So now the bullet's going to be made in the middle, and then it'll fly down. Now if I wanted to, I could move it down closer here, and that would be fine as well. I'm going to open the bullet, and what we're going to do with the bullet is we're going to change the origin, and I'm going to make the bullet in the top center there. Now when we play this, can you see now what it's done? It's made, if I just move it there, the bullet now has been made right pretty much in the center where I put those origins, but it still doesn't move. So what we need to do is alter what's called a create event for the bullet. So if I double click on the bullet, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say add event and then a create. So when this object is created, what we're going to do is we are going to tell it to move. So I'm going to use my fixed direction. I'm going to then say, right, you're going down. And then we're going to set the speed. And the speed's going to be, say, 10. Let's try that. Okay, so let's see what it's going to do. Lovely. So you can see as I move and press the spacebar, the bullets are flying down, which is good. Now it's really good practice to remove anything that's outside of the room. So as an example, when I press this, you can see the bullets go in and then it goes off the edge of the room. Now it's not going to make too much difference in our little program, but if you've got a really big program with lots of objects off screen, it can slow the computer down. So what we're going to do is just add something really small which says add event other outside room. So when my object is outside the room, we're going to just destroy it. Now it's going to have no effect on the visuals on your game, but it will have an effect in the back end of your game. So with our basic game so far, we've got player movement, we've got a firing system, and our bullets are going off on their own, and obviously they go in there and they've been destroyed when they go off screen. We need now to set up what's called a collision. So when our bullet hits the enemy, we need to remove the enemy. Right? So the way we do that is fairly simple. If I go into my enemy, and what we do is we say, right, add event, a collision with the bullet. So what I basically say is when the bullet hits the enemy, then all we're going to do is we're going to destroy that instance. So let's try that. So let me go above here, press that, bang, gone. Bang, gone. Lovely. Now we're going to do it slightly different the other way around, and I'll show you what we'll do later when we actually have the enemies firing back. So that now has obviously got rid of everything. The game still runs. We haven't actually told the game how to actually end. So what we're going to do now is you can add a score counter in. Right, now I'm going to use all the built-in variables because obviously this is a beginner tutorial, so I don't want to go too in depth with it. So let me close that for a moment and let's go back to our game. Now what I'm going to do is add in a object. So I'm going to right click on object, go to create and then go to object, and I'm going to call this an O game manager. Now I tend to use this quite a lot if I'm storing things like scores, or if I'm storing lives or health or anything like that. So it's almost like an object which needs to be there. It's just it calculates things for me. So what we're going to do is add this into my room. Now watch what happens when I drag this on. Now it's going to go on my instances layer, but when I drag it on, because we haven't actually assigned it to sprite, it just comes up with a question mark. That's absolutely fine. It doesn't mean it doesn't work. It's absolutely fine. So what we are going to add in now is our draw event. So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to click on add event, and then I'm going to go down to draw, and we're going to add in a single draw here. Okay, now under this draw I have this option here in the toolbox called drawing, and one of these is called draw value. Now if I drag this over, by default it says right caption, so we change this, and don't forget this is in speech marks, so don't delete the speech marks. And you can see here I put score. In fact we're going to change that a little bit. Your score is. Now we've got that. So the value is going to be score. Now let me explain. This here is just a piece of text. That there is a variable called score. Now if I just go back here and start typing it again, you can see GameMaker helps you. There's a built-in value called score. It's what's called a global variable, so you don't need to define it anyway before you use it. Now you might have seen in one of my other tutorials I've had to define variables before I use it. Because score is a built-in variable, I don't need to define it first, right? Now the X and the Y is where we want to position it. So the X I'm going to put down as 5 and the Y I'm going to put as 10. Now let's just see what that does, right, when I play. Hopefully it should come up and say score 0. Lovely. Now it's really faint at the back there, but you can kind of see it is here. Hopefully the screen recorder is picking it up. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to change the color of that, and I'm going to change the font and the size of it as well. Now to do that, fortunately it's fairly easy. On the right hand side here I have a font folder. If I right click, go to create, and then go down to font, we're going to call this F score, and then press enter and choose a font. I don't really mind what fonts people use as long as it's something that's readable. So I'm going to go with something like that, and I'm going to go and increase the size. So this is going to be 28. That'll be fine. So if I close that, and let's go back up to my game manager. Now what we need to do, this is a linear program, so we need to set the fonts up here. Now the font settings are all done in this red, these red options here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set the color, and the color is going to be black. So if I click on that and we go for a really dark, like a charcoaly type color, and let's add in the set font option, and you can see there, look, it's currently set to none. Let's click the drop down list, click on the font, click on F score, and we've also added the text alignment in there as well. I probably don't need that, I don't know why that popped up, so I'm going to get rid of that really quickly. So let's click on the play and let's see what that does. Lovely, so you can see now it says my score is 0. You might need to move, no, it's actually done, it's okay. So let's do something here. Now you'll notice it doesn't actually do anything, which is a little bit disappointing. The reason it doesn't do anything is because we haven't told it to do anything. So let's close that. Let's open my enemy up, and you can see we have a collision event with a bullet, and all we're telling it to do is destroy the instance. So what we need to do is add in this variable, and I'm going to put it just before we destroy it, and we're going to basically say score is 1 relative. So what that does is every time the bullet hits, or when the bullet hits the enemy, it's going to add 1 to my score and then destroy that instance. Okay, so let's try that now. Let me just move this over and press the fire button. Lovely. So you can see there now 1 comes up. Lovely. I'll do 1 more over here. Excellent, lovely. So we can see that works. Our score counter increments all the way up to 5, which is really, really, really good. That's what I want. Okay, so the next thing we need to look at now is getting our enemy, these here. Ideally, these need to be firing back at us, because obviously we've got a mechanism to score, add, so we need something now that takes points away. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically say, well, if the enemy hits us, we're going to take 1 point off us. Okay, so potentially we can now lose a lot of points. So let's look at how we can do that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create another sprite. So I'm going to right click, go to create, and then go down to sprite. And we're going to call this one S enemy bullet. We're going to do the same sort of thing that I did with the player one. Now I could, if I wanted to, copy it. I'm not. It's good practice to do things again. So I'm going to take off the aspect ratio. We're going to set the width to 16. The height is going to be 32. And then I'm going to click apply. We're going to edit the image. And this time, obviously, the bullet is going the other way. So let's draw something out really quickly. In fact, I'm going to go with a grey with this one. Wow, that is quite difficult to see. So we'll add a little bit of a fill in. Yeah, well, that'll do. And we'll add this grey shape in. Random looking bullet. Okay, so let's close that. And let's close this workspace, we don't need it. And let's now create another object. So right click on the object, go to create. And let's call this one O enemy bullet. And select the correct sprite. Lovely. So essentially my bullet is going out towards my player. I say it's going towards, it's not doing anything at the moment. So this is what we need to do. Currently in our room, this player will fire a bullet every time we press the space bar. Now it's a little bit difficult to do because we have to think of a way to automate this process. Now the way we do this is we use something called an alarm. And an alarm is a process which can occur sort of at a set time. Think of it like an alarm clock, which wakes you up. It'll wake you up at a certain time. Well, alarms are useful in GameMaker because essentially we can tell it to do something every so many seconds, right? Or every so many minutes. And we can also randomize it, which is kind of what we're going to be doing. So our enemies are going to have alarms. Now what we're going to do for this first part is on our enemy, we need to basically create what's called an alarm. So I am going to add event, put to alarm, and this is going to be called alarm 0. So that's the first one. And what I want to do is basically get a random number. Now, if I don't use a random number, they'll all fire at the same time, right? So ideally, I don't want to do that. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to do for the first part of the code, which is this here, create an instance, and the instance is going to be you. The instance is going to be the enemy bullet, and I want it to be relative. I don't mind if it's on the instances layer. It's going to be relative to the enemy, which is fine. Now we also need to make sure our enemy bullet moves upwards. So I'm going to add event create, and what we're going to do is add that and the speed. So we'll do 12 here, so the enemy bullet is faster than ours. And what we're going to say is that when the alarm basically runs, we're going to create one of these bullets. Now, in order to run the alarm, right, we need to basically have a create event. And then what we can do is we can use, there's a set alarm option here. Search for set alarm. There it is. Now this will actually only run once, right? And I'll explain why it'll only run once now. So when this enemy is created, it'll wait 1 second before running this alarm. And then once it's run the alarm once, there's no actual way to reset it. So what you really need to do is add this in as well. We can add that in there. Right. Now, watch what happens when we actually play the game. So hopefully the screen recorder is picking this up, but they're all firing at exactly the same time. They're not randomized, it's just firing at the same time. So what we need to do is stop that, and we need to randomize this a little bit, right? So I'm going to get rid of this set alarm here, and I'm going to go back to my create event, and I'm going to get rid of the set alarm here. Now what we need to do is we need to basically get a random number, and there is one here. If I search for the term get, there's an option here, look, get random number. So I want an integer, and what we're going to do is we're going to give it a random value from 60, which is sort of 1 second, and between 180, which is obviously 3 seconds. Right? So what this does then is it basically will generate a random number, and we need to give it a target. Now we're not giving a variable target, but we are going to say alarm brackets 1. Now I'm going to take a copy of this, and I'm going to put, in fact, no, it's not alarm 1, sorry, it's alarm 0. So I'm going to take a copy of this, and I'm going to paste it into alarm 0 as well. Now this is a little bit, it's not too complex, but it's just a little bit of logic you need to get. So let's play this. Lovely. So you can see now they're all firing at different times. and some are firing quicker than others, which is absolutely fine. Now you can also randomize the speed that this goes if you want. I'm not going to do it in this tutorial, but you can if you want. Now the downside at the moment is that when our bullet hits the player, it's not actually doing anything. So that's the next thing we're going to need to look at. So let me just stop this running, and we are going to open our enemy bullet. And what I'm going to say is when the bullet collides, when the bullet collides with our player, what I need to do is we need to say score, and then I'm going to say -1 relative. Now there's going to be a bit of an issue here. Let me just show you why. So once this starts, now then, as the bullet hits the player, what's happening is the score counter is going up by more than 1, because as soon as the bullet touches the player, it goes to -1, then it goes a little bit further, it goes to -2, then -3, then -4, and so forth. So what we need to do is basically when the bullet hits the player, we need to destroy the bullet. It'll still -1, but it won't then increase as much as what it has done. So if I just go back here and then just go to destroy instance, which is this here, let's try that. Let's try it now. Lovely. So you can see now it's only happening 1, and if we were to fire back at these, you can see the score now is incremented back to 0 from the minus figure that it was. Okay, so we've got our player working, we've got our score counters working quite well, and we've got our enemy firing. Now the only thing you might notice is there is a little bit of an offset issue here, so we're not firing straight from the player, we're actually, sorry, from the enemy. We're not firing from the tip, we're firing from the sort of left hand side. Easy to sort. If we open the enemy, let's move this origin, and we're going to put it right to the top here, let's see. And we're going to do the same here for the enemy bullet. I'm just going to move this right down here, and there we are. That'll solve that a little bit. You can have a custom origin, you don't have to actually have it to the middle center or so forth. Let's just have a look. Yeah, well, that's perfect. That's coming straight out and hitting our player there. Now what we're going to do to make this a little bit more difficult is we want to make these move. So I'm going to get it to move one way and then get it to move back the other, and just keep on going backwards and forwards. So to do that, we're going to use another alarm. Now if I open my enemy, what we want is our enemy to move, stop, and then go back the other way, stop, and then go back the way it was coming. So to do this, I'm going to create a variable, and I'm going to call it enemy speed. So I'm going to drag that in. We're going to call this enemy speed, and I'm going to give the value. I'm going to give a value of 3. Right, so it's not going to be too fast, but you'll see it move, no problem. Now we then need to basically set the alarm, right? So we need to tell it to move. Now I've already used alarm 0. Don't want to use alarm 0 again, so we're going to use a fresh alarm, and it's going to be called alarm 1. Now because I'm doing this all within one object, I can call my variable that I've just made. So in my alarm, what we're going to do is I'm going to say, right, set the speed, and we're going to set the horizontal speed to enemy speed. So what happens is this here, enemy speed variable, is given a value of 3. And then within this alarm, I'm basically saying, look, just use whatever enemy speed is. And there's a reason for it, and I'll show you why now in a moment. Now we're going to start this alarm. So this is alarm 1 fairly quickly. So we leave it count on 30, it'll be fine. So that's half a second. So let's see what it does. Lovely. So they're all now, they're just moving. Good, so we can see the first part of that works. Now what we need to do is get them to move, stop, and then move back, because obviously now they've just gone off the screen and they're probably sort of over there somewhere. So let's open my alarm again. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a little piece of logic. And whenever you multiply a positive number by a negative number, so -1 as an example, it really makes a negative number. So if we have 5 multiplied by -1, it makes -5. If we have -5 multiplied by -1, it gives us a positive number. So what we're going to do is we're going to say enemy speed, and then in the value of enemy speed, this is where we switch. So we say enemy speed multiplied by -1. So this little piece of logic here is where we flip enemy speed. Right? And then what we're going to do is we are going to set the alarm then to run again. So alarm 1, and we're going to basically run it every 1 second. Now if you want to put 2 seconds or something like that, it'll be 120. So let's just see this run in, see what it does. So there are, they've moved, and then they stop and they go back. Okay, so they're now bouncing back and forth, and they'll continue to do that until obviously there comes a time when they don't need to, or you stop the program or whatever. Okay, so our game so far, although it's been 40 minutes tutorial, it's quite a lot. We've got quite a lot working. We've got a score counter working, we've got bullets working, we've got enemy bullets working, we've got our objects moving on their own. It's looking fairly good. Now what we need to do is we need to work out really how to sort of end the game a little bit. Okay, so what I'm going to do is in my game manager, I am going to add in one or two things. So I can either add this, I could probably add it into a step event, but I'm not going to. I'm going to add it into a draw GUI event. So if I click on add draw GUI, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, right, is there any instances of the enemy left? Right? Are there any instances of the enemy left? If there are instances, then just keep on playing. If there's no enemies left, then obviously we've shot them all. So in my game manager, there's an option here that says if instance exists. So I'm going to drag that in, and what we are going to do, again, a little bit of logic, and we're going to say, look, if the object enemy does not exist, notice I've just ticked this not, then we need to do something else, right? So what are we going to do? Well, let's create a rectangle. So first of all, I'm going to add in a color. Let me just double check, what color is my room? White. Okay, so my room is white, so let's add in a dark color. And we need to set it then to be relatively large. Now the way we do this is the top left is going to be 0, and I need to go over to the right. So the right is going to be our room width, because that's the total width of our room. And then the top is going to be 0, and the bottom is going to be the room height. And we need to make sure that's a fill as well. Now, what I'm going to then do is I'm going to have our score displayed prominently. So let's, instead of now setting the draw color, let's set the draw color again to white. And then we're going to add a text. And then we're going to say your score, and then we're just going to say score. And what we're going to do, put this in the center, right? So let's say room width divided by 2, and then room underscore height divided by 2. So I should put it right in the center. And don't forget, because we've got a nice little font, let's put the font in there as well. Let's set the font. Lovely, so our font is here, that's there. Let's try this out now, see if this works. Okay, so I have to be fairly quick on this. So I'm just kind of trying. Lovely. So that's destroyed them all. Obviously, the reason why that just went down to 3 is because there was still a bullet flying towards me, and it literally just hit it as my bullet hit there. So you can see that's not great because that's off a little bit. So what you can do with this, you can play around with the numbers here, or if you want to just center the text, there is a text alignment option here, so you can tell it where you want to align it. I'm not really going to do that too much. Or if you wanted to, you can specify an exact position that you would want it. So you could say, as an example, what's that, 768? So you could say around about, say, 300 on the Y value, and so forth. Okay. Now the other thing we need to do is we need to have a little bit of a check, right? Because ideally what we need to do is look at our game, and if our score counter goes below 0, then really what we need to do is restart the game. Okay, so to do this, what we are going to do is we're going to use what's called a step event. Now a step event runs sort of every step of the game, and what we need to do is basically just check to see if the score has gone less than 0. So if I double click on my player and I click on add event, and then we go to step and then step, what we can then do is we can basically do a logic test. So I'm going to use an if here. So I'm going to say if the score is less than 0, then really I want to restart the game, right? So I'm going to look for the restart option. If you can't see it, just search. Now you've got 2 options. You can either restart the room or restart the game. It doesn't really matter what we're doing for this option, but if I do restart room for this, right? So I just literally grab this and put it onto the right hand side here. Now let's see what happens when we run this. So okay, so I'm gonna shoot 1. There we are. My score is now 1. Let's get shot by this, so we lose a point. There we are. So my score is 0, and all of a sudden my game crashes. And the reason being is now we're in what's called an infinite loop, right? The issue is the score is now -1. This has triggered this event here. So if the variable is less than 1, restart room. And this now is in a constant loop. It's just loop, 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 loop. And the reason for it is the score never gets reset to 0. Okay, so what we need to do is in my create event for my player, so I'm going to add create. What we're then going to do is we're going to say, right, set the variable score. Set the variable score to 0. So every time when we restart the room and the player's created, the score will always be reset to 0. So there we are, we got 1. So let's get shot. There we are. Let's get shot again. There we are. So you can see there it's restarted, and every time we do get shot, it just restarts time again. So that there works. It's good. So just a quick recap of this game. Obviously the graphics aren't brilliant on it, but it's there just to show you and prove a point. We've got our player which can move left and right. Our player can shoot on demand. Our enemies are moving on their own back and forth, and they are shooting in a random order. We've got a score counter which is working. We've got a method to end the game as well. The only thing that we haven't done is essentially when the game ends, so when we clear all of the enemies, we can then obviously restart the game as well. Now we could do, we'll just put a little bit of logic in to say that when we press the enter key, it restarts. Obviously you can do that on your own if you want to play with it. If you've got any comments, please leave them in the box below, or if you've got any questions, I will try my best to answer them.